Hello, everyone. Today we're going to cover the first three skills in the new unit, negative numbers, multiplying and dividing. We're going to talk about signs of expressions. Then we're going to review multiplying negative numbers, and lastly, dividing negative numbers. So let's start with signs of expressions. And the first thing I want to show you is a little trick that I use. The rules for multiplying and dividing are different than addition and subtraction. So this is a new little trick that you can use. It's called a Tic Tac Toe trick. And the only thing that you really need to remember is that the diagonal going down is going to be all pluses, and then everything else is going to be a negative. Now, each box here represents a number times another number equaling an answer. So let's try an example. So let's say I have -3 times 5. So I'm going to find a negative times a positive. Just below it is a positive. And that's going to give me a negative answer. Okay, I could have also used this row right here, negative times a positive. Let me actually get my cursor back. Negative times a positive equals a negative. I could have also gone this way. Negative times a positive equals a negative using the diagonal. So now that we've established that my answer is going to be a negative, then I just need to multiply my numbers. 3 times 5 gives me -15. This is the same rule for division as well. So let's try one of those. -24 divided by -6. Well, let's find two negatives in a row so I can see the bottom row. I've got a negative divided by another negative. That's going to give me a positive. So my answer is going to be a positive, and 24 divided by 6 is +4. And that's basically how it works. A positive times a positive is a positive. A positive times a negative is a negative. And you can just use it. Negative times a positive is a negative. And you can just use this little trick to, it's quick and easy to write down. You can put it on the corner of your notes. So that way, while you're doing the problems, you have it there as a guide. Here's another little trick that I'm going to teach you. It says, what is the sign of the answer to? Now we've got a long string of numbers, some positive, some negative, that we're going to be multiplying. Well, the little trick is if you have an odd number of negatives, let's fill this in, an odd number of negatives, your answer is going to be a negative. And if you have an even number of negatives, your answer is going to be positive. Because think about this. If I were at this first problem on top, -2 times 3, well, that's -6. -6 times 5, -5 is a +30. +30 times a -2 is -60. -60 times -4 is a +240. And then a +240 times 5 is going to give me a +1,200. Now, if you know this little trick, all you have to do is just count your negatives. I have 1, 2, 3, 4. That's an even number, which means my answer is definitely going to be positive. And then you would just need to multiply your numbers. So it makes it a little bit easier. Let's take a look at this bottom one. Underneath it, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 negatives. So I know my answer is going to be a negative. And now I just need to multiply my numbers. 5 times 2 is 10. 10 times 1 is 10. 10 times 2 is 20. 20 times 4 is 80. And 80 times 3 is 240. So our answer would be -240. So now that we know the little tricks for multiplying and dividing, let's go ahead and try some of these problems. So the first skill of the unit is called signs of expressions. So as we can see, our X is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 at approximately -8 on our number line. And then our Y is at approximately a +1. So if I were to use this expression, y times x divided by y, well, I would plug in 1 times -8 over 1. And then we know order of operations tells us to do parentheses first. I've got a -8 divided by 1, which is -8. And -8 times 1 is -8. So that would give me a negative answer. But the other thing I could look at is, well, I know y is positive and x is negative. Well, I've got 1x, which means there's one negative in the problem. 1 is an odd number, which means my answer is going to be a negative. Let's try another one. Here, I'm just going to count my negatives. I have 1, 2, 3 negatives. That's an odd number, which means my final answer is going to be a negative as well. Okay, here, what is the sign of P times Q over P when P is greater than 0? So that means P is a positive, times, and Q equals 0. P is a positive. So all I did was fill in my positives, my negatives, and my zeros. Clearly, there's no negatives here, but 0 divided by anything is going to be 0, and then 0 times anything is going to be 0. So this answer would be 0. Let's try another. What is the sign of 3xy when x is greater than 0 and y is less than 0? So we've got 3 times, if x is greater than 0, that's a positive. And if y is less than 0, that's a negative. I have one negative, which means my answer is going to be negative. Okay, moving on to the next skill, multiplying negative numbers. Now that you know the rules, these are actually fairly easy to do. I have one negative, which means my answer is a negative. We can also use our little tic-tac-toe trick. Okay, so I've got a negative times a positive, which gives me a negative. So my answer here would be negative 12. Okay, here we've got a negative times a negative, which gives me a positive answer. So that's going to give me positive 27 as my answer. Okay, here let me just do the tic-tac-toe one last time. Positive, positive. As you can see, it's very quick and easy to put off to the side. So you have that little tool. In the first one, I see that I have 3 negatives. 3 is an odd number, which means my answer is negative. And then we're just doing the multiplication step. 3 times 4 is 12, and 12 times 5 is 60. So you'll get an answer of negative 60. Oops. Okay. All right, the next one, you've got -2 in parentheses and then the 2 on the outside, the exponent. So what that means is that you're squaring -2, which means you're multiplying -2 times -2. I have 2 negatives, which means my answer should be a positive, or you can use the table. A negative times a negative gives me a positive. And then 2 times 2 is positive 4. This last one is -4 now is in parentheses, which means that you're cubing 4, which is -4 times -4 times -4. Well, I have 3 negatives, which means my answer is going to be a negative. 4 times 4 is 16, and 16 times 4 is 64. So our final answer here would be negative 64. Okay, here's just a couple more. For the first one, we've got 3 negatives, which means my answer is negative. 2 times 5 is 10. 10 times 3 is 30. And 30 times 1 is 30, giving us an answer of negative 30. In 2, we have 2 negatives, which means our answer is going to be positive. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 1 is 6. And 6 times 4 is 24. The last skill of the day is dividing negative numbers. The rules are the same here. Oops. So let's go ahead and try a few of these. Again, if you want to have the little tic-tac-toe off to the side, it's easy enough to write down. So I've got a negative divided by a negative, which means my answer is positive. And 45 divided by 9 is 5. Next, I've got a negative divided by a positive. So that would be this middle row. Negative divided by a positive is going to give me a negative answer. And 49 divided by 7 is 7. Let's do one last one. Okay, we've got a positive divided by a negative, which gives me a negative, and 63 divided by 9 is 7. So that does it for the first 3 skills. Again, you can always watch the videos in Khan Academy if you would like to see additional examples, and please feel free to email us with any questions that you might have. The correlating note-taking packet pages are 1 through 3. Have a great day, everyone.